G.I., why are you here? You should be at home with your honey, eating hamburgers, and drinking milkshake. The longer you are away, the more chance there will be that she will be with another boy. No one loves you. No one cares. You are alone.
The government has abandoned you. They have ordered you to die, G.I. Do not trust them.
Defect, G.I. It is a very good idea to leave a sinking ship.
People do not like you. Your family sees you as an animal. That does not change you to know that sacrifice means nothing to your people. You are not fighting for the security of your country. You are fighting for the profit of the few rich who need you to die so they can buy bigger houses.
They will give you a medal, G.I., but only after you are dead. Your government lies to you every day, poor soldier.
She was the autumn fragrance to her people, a radio host broadcasting from the heart of the enemy. But to the American GIS listening in the dead of night, she was something else entirely. A phantom known only as Hanoi Hannah, the voice that brought the war from the battlefield and into their minds. Her words floated across the jungle canopy, weaving between the cries of insects and the thunder of artillery. No weapon fired, no explosion detonated, yet her presence was felt in every foxhole, in every bunker, in every restless dream. This is the story of a war not only fought with rifles and bombs, but with whispers and doubt. A story where a single voice could unsettle an army, and where propaganda became as lethal as any bullet.
Her voice floated across the humid jungle, drifting over barbed wire and sandbag bunkers, slipping past the ears of exhausted soldiers who clutched their rifles in the dark. It was not shouted, nor harsh. It was calm, steady, and unnervingly intimate. G.I. Joe, she whispered, do you know your government has abandoned you? Do you know your friends are dying in the mud for nothing? Do you know your sweetheart is dancing with another man tonight while you rot in the jungle? The men listened. Some laughed, shaking their heads at the absurdity. Others felt their stomachs tighten, her words digging into fears they tried to bury. She was not a general, not a soldier, not a man with a gun. Yet her presence was undeniable. The soldiers could hear the rain pattering on tin roofs, the crackle of the radio, and then her voice, smooth, deliberate, and chilling. In that moment, they were reminded that the war was not only outside the wire. It was also inside their minds. This is the story of Hanoi Hannah, the woman who waged war with words. The voice that haunted a generation of American soldiers. The soft weapon that turned doubt into a battlefield. The Vietnam War was unlike any conflict America had fought before. A distant struggle in a country few Americans could find on a map, yet it drew in hundreds of thousands of young men, many barely out of high school. They came armed with M16 rifles, helmets, and packs heavy with supplies. They came with training and discipline. But nothing prepared them for the jungles that swallowed whole battalions in its green and endless vastness. The war was brutal, fought in searing heat and torrential rains. American soldiers patrolled rice paddies and dense forests, facing an enemy they often could not see. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army moved like shadows, striking with ambushes, mines, and sudden bursts of gunfire, then disappearing back into the trees. It was not a war of clear front lines or decisive victories. It was a war of attrition, where patience and resilience were as deadly as bullets. America possessed overwhelming firepower. Helicopters thundered across the skies. B-52 bombers dropped endless waves of explosives. Artillery rained down on suspected enemy positions. And yet, despite the firepower, the North Vietnamese endured. They dug tunnels beneath the earth. They hid among civilians in villages. They fought not only with weapons, but with ideas. For the North Vietnamese, the struggle was more than a military campaign. It was a war for survival, a war for identity, a war for independence. To them, the United States was not only an enemy on the battlefield but an intruder in their homeland. And so, they turned to methods beyond combat. They turned to the battlefield of the mind. In Vietnam, psychological warfare became as important as rifles and bombs. Both sides knew that a soldier's morale could mean the difference between holding the line and breaking in fear. The United States dropped millions of leaflets, blasted messages from loudspeakers, and tried to win the loyalty of villagers with promises of security. But the North Vietnamese understood something simple and devastating. Every American soldier carried a radio. Every American soldier longed for news, for music, for a connection to home. The radio waves were open. And so, into that fragile space, into that private world of soldiers, they introduced a voice. A voice that could wound without ever firing a shot. A voice that would soon become infamous under a single name, Hanoi Hannah. Her real name was Trinh Thi Ngo. She was born in 1931, in French-controlled Vietnam, into a world already defined by occupation and resistance. Her childhood unfolded in the shadow of empire. French colonial power dictated daily life, but beneath the surface, nationalist movements stirred restlessly, waiting for their moment to rise. As a young girl, Trinh Thi Ngo watched her country endure not only foreign rule but also the turbulence of the Second World War, when Japanese forces swept through Southeast Asia. She grew up surrounded by struggle, shaped by an atmosphere of both oppression and defiance. Her generation was raised in an environment where questions of identity and loyalty were never abstract, they were lived realities. Unlike many of her peers, she had access to education. She studied languages with a gift for fluency, mastering English with precision and clarity. Her command of the language set her apart, giving her not only the ability to understand the words of the West but also to deliver them back, reshaped and sharpened. In the years after Vietnam declared its independence in 1945, she remained in the North, in Hanoi, as her country split in two. North and South Vietnam became the stage for a global struggle, with the Soviet Union and China backing the Communist North, and the United States pouring its support into the South. The Cold War's front lines ran directly through her homeland. It was during this time that she found her way to broadcasting. Hanoi had established the Voice of Vietnam radio, not merely as a domestic station, but as an instrument of the revolution. Its purpose was clear: to inform, to persuade, to inspire, and to unsettle. Propaganda was not hidden, it was a declared weapon of war. Within the radio's walls, Trinh Thi Ngo's skills found their purpose. Her English was flawless, her diction polished, her voice steady and pleasant. The leadership of the North Vietnamese quickly recognized her potential. To reach the American troops on the ground, to pierce their defenses of confidence and duty, they would need a voice that sounded both credible and familiar. She was chosen. Not because she was the loudest, nor because she was the most strident, but because she embodied something subtler. Her calmness. Her poise. Her ability to deliver the words of the party with a softness that made them harder to dismiss. She would never hold a rifle, never marched through the jungle with the Viet Cong. But her assignment was no less dangerous in its intent. Her battleground was the human psyche. Her weapon was the microphone. And her name, as it spread among the soldiers who came to know her broadcasts, would become etched in the story of the war, Hanoi Hannah. When night fell across Vietnam, the jungle grew restless. The buzz of insects, the distant rumble of artillery, and the murmurs of soldiers waiting for dawn created an uneasy soundtrack. Yet, from the static of battered radios came another sound. A woman's voice. Calm, smooth, deliberate. It was the voice of Hanoi Hannah. Every evening, her program on the Voice of Vietnam carried across the airwaves. The format was always the same, American music, followed by commentary, and finally, carefully chosen words meant to pierce the morale of U.S. soldiers. She spoke as though she knew them personally. She addressed them as G.I. Joe, never as faceless enemies, but as individuals trapped in a war they could not win. Her broadcasts carried an odd intimacy. She played Marvin Gaye, the Supremes, the Beatles, Bob Dylan. Songs that reminded young soldiers of dances back home, of lovers they had left behind, of the world they had once known before the draft pulled them into the jungles of Southeast Asia. For a few moments, the music softened the war. Then her voice returned, weaving doubt into memory. "G.I., she would say, why do you fight in this war? Your leaders know it cannot be won. They send you to die, while they enjoy safety at home. Think of your families. Think of your girlfriends. Do you know who they dance with tonight while you sweat in the jungle?" It was not only vague appeals. She sometimes read casualty lists, naming units that had suffered losses. Soldiers swore she knew the details of their operations, as if she had spies walking among them. In truth, much of her information came from American newspapers, official military releases, and intercepted transmissions. But to the young man huddled in a foxhole, hearing his battalion named aloud on the radio, it was chilling. It felt as though the enemy could see him. Some soldiers laughed off her broadcasts, calling them cheap tricks. They would mock her predictions, joke about her words, and turn up the volume just to hear what she would say next. But others admitted that her voice lingered. Her calm tone, her gentle rhythm, her unsettling words, they planted seeds of doubt that even laughter could not uproot. The genius of her broadcasts lay in their restraint. She did not shout slogans or scream ideology. Instead, she tapped into the soldiers' most human vulnerabilities. Homesickness, fear of death, suspicion of betrayal, the aching distance from family and love. In the heart of the jungle, a single voice reminded them of everything they longed for and everything they feared losing. To many Americans, the war was fought in firefights and patrols. But for those who tuned in at night, another war played out quietly, over the radio. A war where the enemy's most effective weapon was not a rifle, nor a mine, nor a mortar. It was a voice, a woman's voice, that could slip through static and shadows, reaching places even bombs could not touch. And so the legend of Hanoi Hannah grew, whispered among soldiers who knew that when the sun fell and the radios flickered, she would be waiting. For the men who fought in Vietnam, the memory of Hanoi Hannah is inseparable from the memory of the war itself. Her voice drifted into their nights, mingling with the fear of ambush, the weight of exhaustion, and the silence of jungle patrols. Many soldiers admitted they tuned in out of curiosity. Some said it became a ritual, gathering around battered radios to hear what she would say next. They claimed they listened to laugh, but behind the humor was always a trace of unease. Because sometimes, what she said hit too close to home. One veteran recalled the moment she read out the names of American units that had taken casualties. His battalion had been ambushed only days earlier. Now, hearing it repeated by a soft voice from Hanoi, he felt an icy chill. It was like she knew us, he remembered. Like she was standing in the tree line, whispering straight into our camp. Another soldier described how her words lingered long after the radio was switched off. You could shrug it off in front of your buddies. You could joke and say it was all propaganda. But later, when you were alone, when you thought about your girl back home, when you thought about your chances of making it out alive, you couldn't help but wonder if she was right. Not every man feared her. Some said they looked forward to her broadcasts, especially the music she played. In the middle of a jungle night, far from home, hearing Motown or the Beatles was a reminder of normal life. But even then, the comfort came with a sting. Between the melodies came her steady words, pressing doubt into the cracks of a soldier's spirit. To some, she was background noise. To others, she was an invisible presence, a reminder that the enemy understood their fears as well as their tactics. Soldiers began to argue among themselves, was she effective, or was she harmless? The truth lay somewhere in between. She did not turn battalions into deserters. She did not cause men to drop their rifles and surrender. But she created unease. She unsettled. And in a war where morale was as vital as ammunition, unease could be as corrosive as jungle rot. Hanoi Hannah became part of the folklore of Vietnam. She was spoken of in hushed tones, mocked in gallows humor, and remembered long after the war ended. For the soldiers who heard her in the stillness of the night, she was not just a voice on the radio. She was a reminder that war was never fought only with bullets. It was fought in the silence between words, in the spaces where fear and memory lived. And though they never saw her face, many carried her voice with them long after they left the jungle. The United States military was not blind to the influence of Hanoi Hannah. They understood that war was fought not only with helicopters and rifles but with the hearts and minds of the men who carried them. And so, America launched its own campaign to fight words with words, and music with music. Armed Forces Radio became the sound of home for soldiers in Vietnam. It blasted out rock and roll, news, and jokes, designed to remind troops of the country they had left behind. American DJs, with their upbeat voices and familiar slang, filled the airwaves with a kind of sonic lifeline. They played the songs soldiers wanted to hear, wrapped in humor that mocked the enemy and reassured the weary. In Saigon, programs like Radio Free Saigon were created to counteract the enemy's messages. While Hannah whispered doubt, American radio tried to shout confidence. They reassured soldiers that they were fighting for a cause, that their sacrifices had meaning, that their leaders had not abandoned them. The U.S. also relied heavily on leaflets, showering villages and jungles with paper messages urging the Viet Cong to surrender, or promising protection to civilians who cooperated. Loudspeakers mounted on helicopters boomed across the landscape, blasting both warnings and encouragement. Propaganda became as common as artillery shells, falling from the sky and echoing across battlefields. Yet the contest was never equal. The Americans had technology, but Hannah had intimacy. Her broadcasts were not the roar of authority but the whisper of familiarity. Where American radio promised victory, Hannah offered the suggestion of futility. Where American DJs filled the night with laughter, Hannah's words lingered in silence. Psychological warfare became its own front line. For every slogan shouted, there was a counter-whisper. For every promise made, there was a doubt planted. The war revealed a simple truth: morale could not be guaranteed by force alone. It had to be defended daily, like a perimeter in the jungle. For the Americans, the struggle against Hanoi Hannah was not just about drowning her out. It was about holding together the fragile bonds of purpose, keeping men from losing faith as the war dragged on. And though the leaflets burned, the speakers broke, and the DJs tried to lift spirits, her presence remained. She could not be silenced, because she needed only a voice. And the Americans were always listening. To the American soldier crouched in the jungle, Hanoi Hannah was a phantom. She had no face, only a voice carried on waves of static. Men imagined her as a temptress, a mysterious figure draped in shadow, or a spy with access to their deepest secrets. In reality, she was neither myth nor ghost. She was a woman in Hanoi, working long hours in a modest studio, her life shaped as much by the war as the men who listened to her. Trinh Thi Ngo arrived at the radio station each day with scripts carefully prepared by the propaganda department. They were not spontaneous speeches but crafted words, designed to cut deep. She sat before a microphone, her voice steady, her English flawless. Outside the walls of the studio, the city of Hanoi endured bombing raids, shortages, and the strain of a war that touched every family. Inside, she transformed into the calm, unshakable presence that reached American ears across the jungle. Her broadcasts followed routine, but her life was anything but ordinary. The same raids that targeted soldiers in the South often struck the North as well. She lived through the thunder of American bombers, the destruction of buildings, the fear of sudden death. Yet each night, she returned to the microphone. The voice that soldiers feared was born in the same climate of danger and survival. In later years, when asked about her work, she denied malice. She insisted her broadcasts were not meant to terrify, but to persuade. She wanted soldiers to see what she believed was the truth, that the war was unwinnable, that their lives were being thrown away, that they should go home rather than die in a land that was not theirs. To her, the broadcasts were not cruelty, they were a warning. And yet, in war, intent is often irrelevant. What matters is impact. Her calmness contrasted cruelly with the chaos outside. For Americans, her words were proof that the enemy could infiltrate their most private fears. For her people, she was a patriot, using her skills not with a rifle, but with a microphone. Behind the myth of Hanoi Hannah was a woman caught in the same storm as everyone else in Vietnam. She lived with danger, she lived with loss, and she used her gift, her voice, as her contribution to the struggle. The soldiers never saw her face, but for years they could not escape her presence. By the spring of 1975, the Vietnam War was reaching its inevitable conclusion. The North Vietnamese army advanced relentlessly, city by city, overwhelming the South Vietnamese forces. American combat troops had already withdrawn, leaving behind a collapsing government and a desperate struggle to hold on. As tanks rolled southward, as artillery thundered closer to Saigon, the broadcasts of Hanoi Hannah continued. Her voice, steady as always, carried the same message it had carried for years. That the war was lost, that resistance was futile, that the end was near. For some soldiers and civilians, her words now rang with terrifying accuracy. On April 30, 1975, North Vietnamese tanks crashed through the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon. Helicopters lifted frantic evacuees from rooftops as the last American personnel fled. The war that had consumed a generation ended not with victory parades but with chaos and silence. And then, for the first time in over a decade, the broadcast stopped. The voice that had haunted the jungle, that had whispered into the ears of countless soldiers, fell quiet. The war of words, like the war of bullets, had reached its end. For Trinh Thi Ngo, the woman behind Hanoi Hannah, life after the war was far quieter. She remained in Vietnam, working as an English teacher and translator, her fame known but never flaunted. To her country, she was remembered as a patriot who had used her talents in service of the struggle. To many Americans, she was remembered as a phantom from the night, a presence that stirred doubt and unease in a war already heavy with both. She lived out her years in relative obscurity, far from the myth that had once surrounded her. In 2016, she passed away, her death noted in obituaries that reminded the world of her strange and powerful place in history. She was no general, no battlefield commander, but her voice had left its mark on one of the most divisive wars of the 20th century. The war ended. The broadcasts ended. But the memory of Hanoi Hannah lingered, carried in the minds of those who had once listened in the stillness of the jungle. Throughout history, wars have been fought with swords, rifles, and bombs. But alongside them, another weapon has always been present, the weapon of words. From the proclamations of kings to the whispered rumors in the trenches, from leaflets dropped over cities to broadcasts carried across oceans, words have shaped the course of battles as surely as bullets. In the Second World War, American troops in the Pacific heard Tokyo rose, a voice that tried to chip away at their morale. In the Cold War, propaganda became a global force, traveling across borders faster than armies could march. And in the digital age, words have grown even more powerful, reaching millions in an instant, spreading doubt, fear, and persuasion with the speed of light. Hanoi Hannah was part of this long tradition, a reminder that the mind of a soldier is as vulnerable as his body. Her calm voice, carried over the static of jungle radios, showed that a single individual, with nothing more than language, could leave a mark on one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century. For the American soldiers who heard her, she was a phantom who unsettled their nights. For her people, she was autumn fragrance, a daughter of Vietnam who used her gift to fight for independence. For history, she is a lesson, that war is never only about weapons and terrain. It is about belief. It is about perception. It is about the stories men tell themselves as they fight, and the voices that challenge those stories. In war, a bullet can kill a soldier. But a voice, well placed, can wound an army's spirit. Her broadcasts are long silent now, her words faded into the static of memory. But her story endures, as a warning, as a lesson, and as a reminder of the strange, haunting power of words in times of war. And so we close the story of Hanoi Hannah. Not with explosions or battles, but with silence, the silence that follows a voice once feared, once doubted, and never forgotten. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe to our channel for more untold histories from the darkest and most fascinating chapters of our past. Share this video with those who love history, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support helps us bring hidden stories like this one to light. Because history is not only written in blood. Sometimes, it is whispered in the dark.